Okay, so if I were to title this document in the form of a question, it would be a rather long question, but the question helps you to see the purpose of this lecture. What epistemological concepts are in effect in the meta-ethics leading to Kant's construction of a general moral principle? As you can see, I am still and continuing on with my intended goal or purpose in terms of this week's lectures to help you see how it is that philosophers come to formulate, present, or claim that they have discovered a general moral principle that we should all use in making decisions of moral significance. You will see that I continue to use the word meta-ethics and that I continue to use the words general moral principle. We have already looked at the metaphysical, or at some major metaphysical presuppositions in Kant's theory en route to his general moral principle. And now we're going to focus on some epistemological presuppositions. We didn't really do this, except that I did touch on this, kind of as a side point with respect to Bentham, when looking at utilitarianism. And it wasn't really necessary to understand his version of utilitarianism, which, by the way, is called act or classic utilitarianism, because there's actually other kinds. But for Kant, his theory is so radically different. And so what is called formal, it seems more abstract and for a lot of people less intuitive, that it's important to take some time out to take an initial look at some epistemological concepts, even though we are doing ethics. But again, I want to iterate that our metaphysical, epistemological, ethical, political presuppositions and assumptions all interlock in some way to make in a way that influences, colors, and shapes how we organize experience, how we interpret it, and whatnot. So that said, even though these are epistemological concepts that we're going to get into, the point is to understand how Kant gets to his general moral principle. So two terms that we are going to focus on then is a posteriori and a priori. So each of these concepts have two words that name them. The terms a posteriori and a priori are used primarily to denote the foundations upon which something, a truth or a falsehood, is known. So I'm not quite sure why I have so much space here. I really don't need all that space. What I want to do instead is focus on what I have here. So epistemologists would generally say that something is knowable if and only if it can be established independent of any particular experiences other than the experience of learning the language in which the proposition is expressed. So a proposition is simply a truth or a falsehood. So that's an important concept as well. It's not the most important concept in here. I'm just highlighting that this is another important philosophical concept, and that simply means a truth or a falsehood. We might get more into that during our last unit. So when we're talking about something being knowable in this way, we are talking about a priori knowledge. So I'm going to use the triangle a little bit differently than I sometimes do. And I'm not going to do a full-on triangle. So as you know from earlier lectures, sometimes when I use the concept triangle, I'll put the word that names the concept here, the definition, and then examples here. Here I'm using the concept triangle to still highlight and visually iterate that we're covering a core concept, but sometimes I'll still put the definition here. So what I'm going to put in here is a priori. Okay. And then that's supposed to be two different words. And then here, we're going to put the word, of course, this one's longer, so I'm going to have to do it like this, a posteriori. Okay, so this is just telling us that we're focusing on focusing on the concept of what it means for something to be a priori in the epistemological sense, and what it means for something to be a posteriori in the epistemological sense. So over here we would say something is knowable if and only if it can be established on the basis of particular experiences. direct or secondhand, that is, direct or secondhand experiences, particular experiences, for example, the reported particular experiences of others. All right, so I'm going to give you some more information to write down in here, and I am going to start off with a priori. So you might have to pause the video to write down what I want to say. So therefore, I am going to write this part right here. So therefore, a priori truths are those, okay, and I'll let you fill in the rest, are those we can be certain about just by reflecting on the meaning of some words and thinking about the logic that connects them. So again, and this is so important, this is going to really help you understand, are those that we can be certain about just by reflecting on the meaning of some words and thinking about the logic that connects them. In other words, when something is knowable a priori, we are just using our minds. We're not appealing to the external world. We're not appealing to our senses, sight, hearing, smell, sound, touch. We're using just our mind and our capacity to reason, to think about whether a given proposition, to think about whether something is true or actually false. So for a posteriori, we would say, therefore, a posteriori truths are those we can be certain about by using only the senses, are those that we can be certain about by using only the senses. And so, of course, the senses the word senses refers to our ability to see, to hear, touch, smell, and taste. It's really important that you had put the word certainty in each one of these. How do we know for sure that that something is true? How do we know for sure that this belief that I have counts as an item of knowledge? What is the route to knowledge? That's what these are each getting at. This one says that the way that you get to knowledge, right, is not through the senses, but through what? You don't appeal to the senses. Rather, you think about the meaning of the words, whether you're just thinking about an idea or a claim, or you're looking at a written statement. You just look at the meaning of some words, or you think about the meaning of some words, and then you do the thinking required to see how those words connect in the idea expressed to determine whether or not what you're thinking about, a belief, is a true one. And so we're going to get to some examples that will help you better see this. When you're saying that you can know something, that a belief counts as knowledge a posteriori, you're saying the only way to know if this is true, and hence be certain that this belief is true, whether you're contemplating it just in your mind or as a written statement, is ultimately there must be some appeal to the senses. And when philosophers say experience, they usually mean sensory experience, which I think is unfortunate because I believe in something called rational experience, which is arguably extricable to some extent from sensory experiences. So keep that in mind as well. So let's go ahead and work with an example that will help you to do that. So an example of an a priori, something that can be knowable a priori includes the following. If a document is printed on white paper, or I should say, let's say some information. If some information is printed on white paper, then the respective document lacks color. So this is going to be our example. So if I was doing the full-on triangle, I would have this right here, this right here. Sometimes I just put the triangle top of all the information I want to give you about the concept. So let's look at this claim here. So it doesn't have to be written in order for you to think about it. It could be just in your mind. But this is an example of something that is knowable a priori. This would be considered an a priori truth. So remember, it's something that can be established, a belief or a claim that can be established independent of any particular experience. As you wrote down here, it's something that we can be certain is true just by looking at the words and thinking about the meaning of the words and how they connect to each other logically. So we have, if some information is printed on white paper, the most important information in here is that is this right here, white paper, and really it's white. And then we've got, then the respective document lacks color. So then the two most important concepts to think about in terms of, how do they connect? So we think about the meaning of white paper, and then we think about the meaning of what it means to be white, and then we think about what it means to lack color. So then we realize, oh, well, I've been taught that the meaning of white is that it is not a color. Red is a color, but white, black, and gray are not considered colors. So by definition, white is not a color. So now notice, do I have to go and look? Do I have to go and ask, let's put it this way, do I have to go and look at a bunch of pieces of paper with ink that's printed on them and say, yep, every single document I've looked at that where information is on white paper is a document that lacks color? No, we know just from the definition of the word white, right, that obviously whatever is white is going to lack color. So then we can tie that back to the other meaning of the words, but it's less important. These are the most important concepts. So we've just looked at the meaning of the words and how they connect logically to determine whether or not the statement is true. We did not have to go and empirically verify in the moment. Yes, I've been taught what these words mean. So in that sense, experience had a role to play. But in the moment that I needed to decide whether or not this is true, I did not have to go and see anything. I did not have to hear anything to decide that this is true. Provided I know the meaning of the words at this point in time, at this moment, I can know and be 100% this is true, and that this is true just using the meaning of the words and how they connect. What we're doing here then, Kant would say, is we're using our rational capacities. We are using reason to figure out whether or not this claim is true. So an example of something that is known a posteriori would be this very document lacks color. Okay, so when I say this very document, I mean this document that we're writing on. The only way to know this is to actually look at the document. If I'm a blind student and I have somebody who's taking notes for me, then I'd have to ask the person with sight to verify with their eyes and hence tell me so that I can hear with my ears whether or not this document is actually white. When I look at the words in this sentence, there is no way to use only the meaning of the words and how they logically connect to decide whether or not this is true. Again, this can be a claim that's just in your mind that you're contemplating. You're wondering whether this is true, whether this statement counts as an item of knowledge, whether you can be certain that this belief is true. But there's no way to figure it out using just the meaning of the words and how they connect. You have to use your senses or use the direct or use secondhand sensory experiences that is as reported by others to determine whether this sentence is true. So for example, if I said, my philosophy professor's car is white, think about the meaning of those words. Does the meaning of the words tell you whether or not that sentence, the claim that it makes really is true? No, you'd actually have to see my car or know somebody who has seen my car or heard about my car. Okay, so now we're going to work through these examples. And like I said, this is going to really help you to understand where Kant is coming from. And why is that? Because you have to remember that according to Kant, reason is compelled to help us formulate a conception of the moral law whereby we are able to discover rules that guide our actions and choices and decisions in matters of moral significance. So it's reason that leads us to the moral law. It is reason that helps us to discover what rule or set of rules, moral rules, we ought to live by. So what would it look like for a human with rational powers to construct and figure out the moral rule or set of rules that we live by? Remember with Bentham, what did he do? He used a posteriori means to come up with his general moral principle. A posteriori, I should say. He looks out at the natural world, at nature. He says, what do you observe about humans? What I observe about them is that they desire as much pleasure as possible or happiness, and to avoid as much pain as possible. So he's using a posteriori means to get to, in establishing his metaphysical foundations and getting through his meta-ethics all the way to his general moral principle. For Kant, this is not going to work. And we'll get more into that in a minute. So let's just make sure we understand what it might mean to come up with something using just your rational capacities through a priori means. So Dr. A's car is red. There's no way to know if the statement is true just by looking at the meaning of the words, that there's a person called Dr. A that has a car and her car is red. Nope. So that would be through, for this one, and by the way, I'm going to do this like this. I'm going to say that this is answer A and this is answer B. So this claim can be known to be true only through a posteriori means. Any car that is red is a car that has color. So I think about what it means to, what the meaning of this word is, and how it logically connects to this phrase, has color, and using just my mind and knowledge of the meaning of the words, I am able to discern that this is true. So I don't have to go and look at all cars that are red with my eyes or hear about all cars that are red to know that any red car is a car with color. That I'm able to know through a priori means. There is a definition given for free will in this document. The only way to, so I look at the meaning of the words in the sentence. There's no way to figure out using just the meaning of the words whether or not the statement is true. I actually have to go through page 1 and page 2 of this document, or have someone do it and report it to me to know whether statement 3 is true. So this can be known only through a posteriori means. What I encourage you to do at this point is to work through maybe from 4 through 8 and then check your answers. As you're working through these, you want to use the information given for a priori and a posteriori. The part that I told you to add right here, these are the most useful parts. Remember, you're not applying what you think these words mean. I'm not asking you what these words mean to you when I'm telling you to apply the terms a priori and a posteriori to these claims. I'm asking you to engage in high-level critical thinking where you take this definition, and then you try to apply them to these statements to decide whether they can be known as true with certainty a priori or only through a posteriori, and it's either one or the other. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to assume that you've tried some of these, and I'm going to go ahead and simply give the answers. So no moral statements or non-moral statements. So that one, yes, you've been taught the meaning of the words, but our definition accounts for that, right? It says, other than the experience of learning the language in which the proposition is expressed. So you've learned the meaning of these words, right? This is the proposition, a truth or falsehood is expressed in the sentence. You learn the meaning of moral statements and non-moral statements. Just by thinking about the definition given for moral statement and non-moral statements, you should be able to figure out, just using your mind's knowledge of the definitions, whether or not this is true or false. And of course, you can discern that this is true using just your mind. So this would be knowable a priori. There is at least one lion in the Dallas Zoo. The only way to know that is a posteriori. If there is at least one lion in the Dallas Zoo, then there is at least one animal in the zoo. So of course, the words that you're really focusing on are lion and animal, and of course you can know this a priori. Look at how different, this might be the best example for some of you in is look at how different these claims are, 5 and 6. Maybe that helps you to see even better the difference in how, or the difference between a priori and a posteriori conceptions of knowledge and how we decide something is certainly true. So this one's knowable, what? A priori. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I hadn't gotten to that one, but let's go ahead and look at it. If Sean is holding 2 paper cutouts of a triangle, then Sean is holding 2 3-sided paper cutouts. So we know that they are cutouts of a what? Triangle. We already know before we read anything else what? That a triangle has 3 sides. So if he's holding 2 paper cutouts of a triangle, we know before even reading the rest that he's holding 2 paper cutouts of what? Two paper cutouts of a what? 3-sided, or holding 2 3-sided paper cutouts. So this, of course, is known a priori. What else? Sean is holding 2 paper cutouts of a triangle. The only way to know that is through a posteriori means. All bachelors are unmarried men. So I think about the meaning of bachelors and unmarried men. I realize that can be known a priori. Dr. A's son is a bachelor. So the only way to know if that's true, of course, is what? There's nothing in the meaning of the words to help me decide whether or not this is true or false, whether the proposition expressed in this claim is true or false, or actually true or false. That would be a posteriori, and have to ask Dr. A or her son, maybe look at some county records. Dr. A is 5 foot 2 inches tall. Again, there's nothing in the claim, no words in the claim, no meaning in the words in the claim that can help me discern using just my mind whether this claim is true or false. I'd have to go out and measure her, ask her, look at I'd have to do something like that. Oh, those are the only 2 things. So that would be a posteriori means. Anyone who is under 5 foot 2 inches tall is less than 62 inches tall. So I just think about this. So here we're doing mathematics. So this is known by what? I just have to know that 5 foot 2 inches converts to what? 62 inches and vice versa. So I'm just using my knowledge of numbers and conversion and measurement. So that can be known a priori. And indeed, a lot of people would argue, including mathematicians, that all of math is a priori knowledge. And then you have people saying, of course, that science is ultimately a posteriori. The Empire State Building is taller than any building in downtown Dallas. Okay, so the only way to know this ultimately is that somebody had to measure the Empire State Building and somebody had to measure all of the buildings in downtown Dallas. Of course, they could have measured this one first and then focused only on buildings that seemed like they might be taller than that. Okay, so that's one thing. So you'd have to physically go out, measure it, and see what the measurements are. Of course, you could get reports and get secondhand sensory-based information. So this would be a posteriori. All general moral principles are moral statements. Again, all you have to think about is the definition given for this concept and the definition given for this concept. And of course, you realize that this does make a claim about right and wrong, as does this. And you're able to discern using only your mind and knowledge of the definitions that this is known a priori, that you can know with certainty whether this claim is true a priori. No moral statements can also be non-moral statements. So again, you're just thinking of the meaning of the term moral statements, and you're thinking of the meaning of the term non-moral statements. Using only the definitions, the meanings of the words, and how these connect or fail to connect, we realize that this can be known a priori. There are 2 moral statements on this document. There's nothing in the meaning of the words that I can connect to decide with certainty whether or not this claim is true. Hence, I can only know by using my experiences, sensory experiences, or the reported sensory experiences of others. I have to look at the document, pages 1 and 2, to make sure there are no moral statements. And of course, there are no moral statements. So this can only be known a posteriori. Keep in mind that these are just statements about moral statements. So they're making claims about moral statements, but they are not in and of themselves moral statements. So notice that at no time were we concerned with whether or not any of these statements were actually true or false. That was not the point of this. We're not saying this statement 16 is true or false. We're saying, how do we know that statement 16 is true or false? Can we know a priori, or can we know only a posteriori? When it comes to morality, when it comes to knowledge of morality and the moral truths that we need in the form of principles and values and whatnot, Kant says that we come to know what the moral law requires of us through a priori means, that is, through our mind's ability to reason its way to moral truths. So it's able to look inward. So in Kant's theory, you're looking inward, not outward like Bentham at the natural world. You're looking inward, using your mind and its power to reason, your rational capacities to sift through various ideas, concepts, and possibilities to think about and come up with, to discover the moral law and the moral rules that ought to guide our behavior. We cannot use our reason, or we cannot use a kind of reason, which is not a priori reason. We cannot use ultimately a posteriori means, because if we look out at the natural world, we'll see that what seems to be the case for one person can be quite different from the other person, for another person. So in the natural world, we notice a lot of variability when it comes to people's circumstances, feelings, and situations. And that was covered in the reading, so I'm really not focused on that. I'm just kind of connecting what I've said to that. For Kant, an important meta-ethical presupposition is that morality makes sense only if it applies to all people at all times, in all places, in all circumstances. So no matter what your situation is, no matter how you feel about something, no matter who you are, whatever turns out to be a moral rule or duty for one person will turn out to be a moral duty for you, because morality makes sense only if it's universal. So we cannot use what we observe in nature or the actual world because there's so much variability. Only a priori means via our power to reason can lead us to moral truths that will apply to everyone.